Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to take you back to 2012, to a small, peaceful town in West Virginia, Star City. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, where the streets were quiet, and the community was close-knit. Set against the backdrop of the Monga River, Star City was a place that promised safety and serenity. But what seemed like the ideal town for a calm, happy life would soon become the scene of an unsettling mystery. A young girl, full of promise and dreams, would suddenly disappear without a trace, leaving behind nothing but questions, heartbreak, and an endless search for answers. This is the story of Skyler, a 16-year-old girl who had a bright future ahead of her. A girl with ambition, intelligence, and a loving family. Skyler was a bright student, a daughter who made her parents proud, and a friend who had the world ahead of her. Yet, on the night of July 5, 2012, Skyler vanished from her home, and nothing about her disappearance made sense. Was it a case of a young girl running away, or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? What followed was a desperate search, a trail of clues that led investigators to question everything they knew about Skyler's life and her relationships. As time passed, the investigation would reveal secrets and betrayals that no one could have expected. Skyler's case would become a haunting reminder of how quickly things can unravel, even in the most peaceful places. Let's walk through this step by step, as we uncover the dark secrets hidden beneath the surface of a tragedy that shook Star City to its core. Skyler was the kind of girl everyone admired. At just 16, she was already known for her infectious smile, her intelligence, and her deep ambition. She wasn't just any high school student. Skyler was determined. She had dreams that went beyond the usual aspirations of a teenager. Skyler wanted to become a lawyer, a voice for the voiceless, someone who could fight for justice for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Every day, she poured herself into her studies, excelling in every subject, pushing herself further, driven by a dream that seemed so within reach. Born and raised in Star City, Skyler was a familiar face to everyone in town. She wasn't just a student at the local high school, she was the pride of her family, the apple of her parents' eyes. David and Mary, her parents, had always seen something special in her. They were a small, close-knit family, and Skyler was the center of their world. She was an only child, and her parents adored her with all their hearts. They showered her with love, support, and hope for the future. Skyler's happiness and success meant everything to them. She was a cheerful, obedient daughter, someone who always did what was expected of her. Skyler wasn't just the responsible child, she was also the best friend anyone could ask for. Her childhood was marked by an inseparable bond with Celia, her best friend. They had shared everything since they were 8, from childhood secrets to teenage dreams. To her parents, Skyler was not just a daughter, she was their joy, their hope, their future. But as we all know, sometimes, even the happiest, most well-adjusted lives can be turned upside down. For Skyler, that fateful night in July 2012 would mark the beginning of the end of her seemingly perfect life. A life that had so much promise, yet was about to be shattered forever. It was a warm summer evening in July 2012 when Skyler finished her shift at the fast food restaurant where she worked part-time. It had been a long day, but Skyler was used to the routine. After a quick shower, she chatted with her parents, David and Mary, before heading to her room to relax. There was nothing unusual about the night. She was just a teenager, winding down after a day of work and school, like so many other kids her age. Her parents, as they had done countless times before, kissed her goodnight and carried on with their evening. David and Mary were under the impression that everything was just as it always had been. Little did they know, that evening would mark the last time they would ever see their daughter in the comfort of their home. The next morning, however, things weren't as they seemed. David went to check on Skyler, expecting to see her getting ready for another busy day, but instead, he was met with a disturbing sight. Her room was empty. The bed, undisturbed. The silence in the house was deafening. At first, David thought she had simply snuck out to meet friends. Skyler was 16 rebellious years, full of typical teenage impulses. But as he took a closer look, his gut told him something wasn't right. The window was open, and a chair was knocked over, as if hastily moved. Skyler's things, her phone, her toothbrush, were still in her room. Her personal belongings were scattered around, almost as if she had left in a hurry. Panic began to set in. David knocked on the door, calling out her name. There was no answer. He called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. As time passed, the unease in his chest grew. This was not like Skyler. She was always responsible, and this sudden disappearance raised more questions than answers. Had she run away, or was something more sinister at play? David's mind raced as he began retracing her steps, but every possibility seemed more troubling than the last. His daughter, the bright, promising young girl who had never given them a reason to worry, was gone. No note. No warning. No explanation. Skyler had simply vanished, leaving nothing behind but confusion, worry, and a gnawing sense of dread. As the hours ticked by, David's concern deepened into something far darker than he had initially feared. Skyler was nowhere to be found, and the silence from her phone was unnerving. David, now visibly shaken, continued to call her phone, but each attempt was met with the same disheartening result: voicemail. He called once more, desperately, then again. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood there, staring at the device in his hand, willing Skyler to answer. But the phone remained silent. With mounting anxiety, David rushed back to Skyler's room, hoping that perhaps he had missed something, some clue that would explain where she had gone. But nothing had changed. The room was as it had been the night before: quiet, untouched, yet so painfully empty. Her personal belongings were still there: her phone, her toothbrush, and the clothes she had worn the day before. Nothing seemed out of place, except for one glaring absence: Skyler herself. He called Mary into the room. Together, they combed through the house once more, hoping that Skyler might just be hiding somewhere, playing a prank on them. But there was no sign of her. At this point, panic was starting to take hold. David's mind raced with possibilities. Could she have run away? Had something happened to her? There was only one way to find out: contacting Skyler's friends. The couple spent the next hours calling anyone who might know where Skyler was. They contacted Celia, her best friend, and the others who were closest to her. But no one had seen her. No one knew where she was or what had happened to her. As the day stretched on, the sense of dread deepened, and David couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Then came the call from the fast food restaurant. Skyler hadn't shown up for her shift. This was completely out of character for her. Skyler was always responsible, never missing work without a valid reason. She had always been punctual, a girl who took her obligations seriously. But now, her absence seemed like a glaring sign that something was off. This was no normal teenage misstep. Skyler had simply disappeared. The phone calls to her friends and work, the empty room, and the silence from her phone all pointed to the same troubling conclusion: Skyler was not just late, not just out with friends. Something had happened. Something that no one could explain. The more David tried to rationalize it, the more the reality set in. His daughter was gone, and the world they once knew had shifted into something unrecognizable, full of fear and unanswered questions. With each passing hour, the panic in David and Mary's hearts grew, gnawing at them with an intensity they couldn't escape. Desperate to find their daughter, they immediately contacted the police, hoping for guidance, for a professional hand in solving this growing mystery. But what they were told was not what they expected. The officer on the other end of the line suggested that Skyler might have simply run away. After all, she was 16, a typical age for a teenager to rebel. It was not unusual for kids her age to sneak out, especially if they were upset or seeking freedom. The police, initially, weren't overly concerned. Skyler's parents, however, knew their daughter better than anyone else. This wasn't like Skyler at all. This was not some teenage whim. As the day wore on, the gut-wrenching feeling of something being terribly wrong began to solidify. David and Mary couldn't sit still any longer. They knew they had to act, and they had to act fast. They took matters into their own hands and began their own search. They reached out to every friend, neighbor, and relative Skyler might have been in contact with. They scoured the town, knocking on doors, asking questions, pleading with anyone who might have seen something, anything that could lead them to their daughter. The small town of Star City, usually so quiet and peaceful, now became the backdrop for an unfolding nightmare. Flyers were printed and posted on every corner, in every shop window, in every place where people gathered. They offered a reward for information, desperate for any clue that could help them find Skyler. But no one had seen her. The town, once full of familiarity and routine, felt suddenly foreign and hostile. There were no signs of Skyler anywhere. Not a trace. No one could recall hearing anything strange the night she disappeared. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The clock was ticking. With every hour that passed, David and Mary's hopes began to fade. They knew in their hearts that this was no simple case of a runaway. Skyler wasn't the type to leave without a word, especially without telling her closest friends or her parents. Something was wrong. Something that went far beyond the typical teenage behavior. And as the days wore on, that deep, unsettling feeling grew stronger. Skyler was out there somewhere, but where? And more importantly, who or what was keeping her from coming home? As the days stretched on with no sign of Skyler, David and Mary's hopes began to fade. The town was still buzzing with concern, but the mystery of Skyler's disappearance only deepened. The search was growing colder by the minute. Then, just when it seemed like the case was slipping through the cracks, a breakthrough emerged that would shift everything. The police, not willing to let this case become another cold case, decided to take a closer look at the surveillance footage from nearby cameras, hoping for any clue, any hint of what had happened to Skyler. It wasn't much, but as they sifted through the grainy footage, they found something. At around 12:30 a.m., a blurry figure appeared on the screen, moving swiftly near Skyler's home. It was her. Skyler was seen climbing out of her window, looking as if she were leaving the house deliberately. The footage was shaky, and the quality was poor, but it was enough to confirm one thing: Skyler had left on her own. This wasn't a random kidnapping, not in the way they had hoped for, and certainly not in the way they had feared. Skyler had made a choice. But as the investigators reviewed the footage again, a new question emerged. Why? Why would Skyler leave in the dead of night, leaving her family and friends behind without a word. She had been so close to her parents, so committed to her responsibilities, she wouldn't just vanish without a reason, without even a hint of where she was going. The footage didn't answer that question. It only deepened the mystery. The car she climbed into was seen pulling away from the house, but the video was too blurry to make out the license plate. Whoever had been driving that car had been careful, but still, it was a lead, however small. They now knew that Skyler had left with someone, but who? And why? Was she meeting someone she trusted, or had she been coerced? The questions kept piling up, each more chilling than the last. For the first time since Skyler's disappearance, there was a glimmer of hope that they might be able to find her. But it also meant something much darker: Skyler had chosen to leave. But the real question now was, what had driven her to make that decision? And who was involved? As the investigation pressed on, the answers seemed more elusive than ever, but one thing was clear: Skyler's disappearance wasn't a simple case of running away. There was far more to the story, and the truth was slowly beginning to surface. As the investigation into Skyler's disappearance unfolded, the police began to focus their attention on those who were closest to her two best friends, Ed and Rare. The trio had been inseparable for years, sharing every moment together, from the ups and downs of high school life to the quiet afternoons spent at each other's houses. Everyone in the small town knew that the three girls were like sisters. They had laughed together, cried together, and built their lives around one another. So, when Skyler disappeared, it was only natural for the investigation to turn to Ed and Rare, the last people known to have seen her. At first, Ed and Rare seemed cooperative with the police. They were questioned about the night Skyler vanished, and they both confirmed that they had spent time with her before she left. But as the officers dug deeper, the cracks in their stories began to show. Their accounts of the evening were inconsistent, leaving the police with more questions than answers. Ed and Rare claimed that Skyler had been with them until late, but neither of them could provide a clear explanation of what happened after they parted ways with her. Their version of events seemed disjointed, each telling a different story, and the timeline was murky at best. It was as if they were trying to protect something they didn't want anyone to know. What stood out the most, however, was their behavior. While their friend was missing, and her family was frantically searching for her, Ed and Rare remained surprisingly calm. There was no visible concern on their faces, no real sense of urgency in their words. They didn't seem troubled, or even particularly upset. Instead, they seemed almost detached from the situation, as if they were merely going through the motions of being questioned without any real emotional investment. For someone so close to Skyler, such a lack of concern was unsettling, and it raised suspicions. Why weren't they worried? Why weren't they frantic, like Skyler's parents and the rest of the town? Was it possible that they knew something the police didn't? Had they been involved in her disappearance in some way? Their calmness, combined with the inconsistencies in their statements, made the investigators uneasy. And with every passing hour, their roles in this mystery seemed more suspicious. Could it be that these two girls, who had once been Skyler's closest friends, were hiding something? Or worse, were they somehow responsible for her sudden disappearance? The more the police questioned them, the more they began to wonder, what if the people Skyler trusted most had something to do with her vanishing? And what were they hiding? As the investigation continued, the answers were becoming harder to find, but one thing was certain: Ed and Rare's involvement in this case was far from clear. And their apparent lack of concern only added to the growing sense that something far darker was at play. As the investigation dragged on, the twisted reality of what had happened to Skyler began to slowly unravel, but not through the typical course of police work or forensic breakthroughs. It was a confession, one that came after intense questioning and mounting pressure. Rare, once a friend so close to Skyler, finally broke under the weight of the investigation. What she revealed would leave everyone in disbelief. It wasn't an impulsive act, not a spur-of-the-moment crime born from anger or jealousy. No, what Rare confessed was something far more chilling. The murder of Skyler had been planned for months. Rare and Ed had carefully crafted their plot, a dark plan fueled by emotions that no one, not even Skyler's closest friends, had fully understood. There had been no sudden fight, no argument that led to violence. It was a decision, a conscious choice made by two people who were once like family to Skyler. They had thought about it, they had discussed it, and when the time came, they executed it with unsettling coldness. On the night Skyler disappeared, they lured her to a secluded area near Blackview, far enough from the safety of home to do the unthinkable. Skyler, trusting her friends as she always had no reason to suspect that the two girls she considered sisters were planning her end. It was there, in the shadow of the woods, that Rare and Ed ambushed Skyler. With brutal force, they stabbed her repeatedly, each strike taking away a little more of the life that Skyler had once dreamed of. Her cries for help were drowned out by the darkness of the forest, and in that moment, the two girls, who had once laughed and shared their lives with Skyler, became her executioners. When the unthinkable was done, when Skyler's life had been violently snatched away, they didn't call for help, didn't rush to tell anyone what had happened. Instead, they did their best to cover their tracks. They buried her body with branches, dirt, and stones, trying to erase any trace of the crime they had just committed. They wanted to make sure that no one would ever find out what they had done. Skyler, the girl who had trusted them with everything, had been left to die in the woods. Her once close friends, the ones she had laughed with and confided in, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. They had turned from the people Skyler knew and loved into her killers. What was once a bond of friendship was now stained with blood, and the truth, when it finally came out, was darker than anyone could have predicted. The confession shocked everyone. David and Mary, who had welcomed Rare and Ed into their home like daughters, the police who had worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, and the entire town of Star City, who had once believed in the purity of the friendship the three girls shared. Now, it was clear that this wasn't just a tragic disappearance, it was murder, cold and calculated, carried out by the two people Skyler had trusted most. Rare and Ed's initial reactions were as calm as they had been throughout the investigation. They denied any involvement in Skyler's disappearance, keeping up the facade of innocence that had first earned them the trust of both Skyler's family and the community. Their stories remained consistent, or at least they seemed to. However, the deeper the investigation went, the more the cracks in their testimonies began to widen. Small inconsistencies appeared in their accounts, details that didn't match up, and alibis that seemed to crumble under closer scrutiny. What had once appeared as a tragedy of a missing girl was now unfolding into something far more sinister. The police began to piece together the fragmented truth. Rare and Ed's carefully constructed web of lies couldn't hold for long. Every new piece of evidence seemed to contradict their previous statements, and with each revelation, their credibility faded. The police knew they had to keep pressing, and as the interrogation continued, the truth started to leak through the cracks. The two friends, once so close to Skyler, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. Their friendship with her, built over years of shared memories, had been a mere facade to mask their deadly plan. As the lies unraveled, the truth emerged, and the community was left in absolute shock. How could this happen? How could two girls, who had known Skyler since childhood, who had spent countless hours together, betray her in such a brutal, calculated way? The town, which had always been so tight-knit and trusting, was now left questioning everything they thought they knew about the people they trusted most. Skyler's family, in particular, was left reeling. David and Mary had welcomed Rare and Ed into their home like family, trusting them with their daughter, treating them as if they were their own. How could these two girls, whom they had cared for so deeply, commit such an atrocity? The betrayal cut deeper than the loss of Skyler itself. It was a betrayal of trust, of love, and of the very essence of what family meant. The community, too, was torn apart. The shock waves of the crime rippled through the town, leaving everyone grappling with a sense of disbelief. How could something so horrific happen in their quiet, peaceful town? Skyler's friends Rare and Ed had become the very monsters they had once trusted, and no one could understand how things had gone so terribly wrong. As the investigation moved forward, the truth began to settle in, but the scars from the betrayal would remain for a long time. Skyler's memory would live on, but so would the painful reminder of the darkness that had hidden behind the smiles of those she loved the most. The courtroom was a place where years of pain and sorrow came to a head for Skyler's family. The trial, which had been anticipated for months, was finally underway. For David and Mary, it was an agonizing process, one that forced them to relieve the nightmare of losing their daughter while watching the two people who were once considered family face the consequences of their brutal actions. Ed and Rare, the two girls who had been trusted with Skyler's life, were now sitting in the dock, charged with her murder. As the trial progressed, it became increasingly clear just how cold and calculated their betrayal had been. The evidence, though damning, painted a picture of two young girls who, despite their years of friendship with Skyler, had decided that their secrets were worth more than her life. The courtroom was filled with tension, with each witness, each piece of evidence driving home the harsh reality of the crime. David and Mary, though silent in their grief, could not escape the fact that their daughter's life had been taken by the very people they had welcomed into their home. When the verdicts were read, the weight of the decision was immense. Ed was sentenced to life in prison, a life taken from her in an instant with no chance of undoing what she had done. However, due to her age at the time of the crime, she was eligible for parole after 15 years. That glimmer of potential freedom seemed like a cruel joke to Skyler's parents, who knew their daughter would never have the chance to live out the future she had dreamed of. Rare, on the other hand, was sentenced to 30 years in prison for second-degree murder. It was a punishment, but it hardly seemed enough to make up for the loss that had been inflicted upon Skyler's family. What was most unsettling, however, was the lack of genuine remorse shown by both defendants. Rare, despite her apology, seemed to be speaking more for the court's benefit than from any real sense of guilt or sorrow. Her words appeared hollow, as if she were reciting a script, offering what she thought would appease those watching. It was clear to everyone in the courtroom that her apology was too little, too late. Ed, in contrast, showed no emotion at all. She remained cold, detached, even as the full extent of her actions was laid bare for the world to see. The lack of any visible regret or acknowledgement of the pain she had caused was almost as chilling as the crime itself. She had been given a chance to express sorrow, to show some semblance of humanity, but instead, she remained unmoved. For David and Mary, the trial brought no peace. It didn't bring their daughter back, nor did it offer any closure to the horror they had endured. What it did offer was a grim reality: the two people who had once been like daughters to them had stolen the life of their beloved Skyler. As the gavel came down and the sentences were read, Skyler's parents had to come to terms with the fact that justice, though served, would never bring their daughter home. Skyler's tragic death is a haunting reminder of how fragile trust can be and how quickly relationships, once believed to be unbreakable, can shatter into pieces. For those who knew her, it is hard to imagine how a friendship, built over years of shared experiences, could turn so dark. But Skyler's story underscores something that many of us fail to realize until it's too late: the importance of communication, honesty, and trust in every relationship, especially among young people navigating the turbulence of adolescence. It's a stage where emotions can run high, and the pressure to fit in or to protect secrets can lead to devastating consequences. What happened to Skyler wasn't just the result of a single moment of rage, it was the culmination of years of emotional turmoil, jealousy, and secrecy. Her story highlights the dangers of unspoken conflicts, how unresolved emotions can fester beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. Skyler's death was not a random act, it was a calculated decision by those who were once closest to her. And this tragedy serves as a painful reminder of how easily things can go wrong when young people are not equipped to manage their emotions and conflicts in healthier ways. The shock waves of Skyler's death were felt far beyond her family. It sent ripples through the entire community of Star City, a place once thought to be safe, where people trusted each other like family. The very foundations of that trust were rocked, and many began questioning the relationships around them, unsure of who they could truly rely on. The pain Skyler's family endured was unimaginable, and no amount of justice could bring their daughter back. But from their unimaginable loss came an unshakable determination to ensure that no other family would have to go through the same agony. Skyler's parents, David and Mary, channeled their grief into action, pushing for legislative change that would help prevent future tragedies like their own. They fought tirelessly for what became known as the Skyler Act, a law designed to address the gaps in how missing persons cases are handled. The law aimed to ensure that police take immediate action when a young person is reported missing, rather than waiting for the 24-hour period that often allows vital clues to slip away. The Skyler Act would become a legacy, one that would help bring change and offer some hope to those who might otherwise feel helpless in the face of a similar crisis. Skyler's death changed the way her community viewed safety and trust. It sparked conversations about the importance of mental health, emotional support, and the need for better communication among young people, parents, and educators. Her story was a painful wake-up call to the world, showing just how fragile these bonds can be, and how, without understanding and empathy, those we trust the most can become the ones who hurt us the deepest. As the law changed, so did the way people thought about their relationships, their children, and the ways they navigated the complexities of youth. And though nothing could ever bring Skyler back, her legacy would live on, sparking change in the very laws that sought to protect others from the heartbreak her family endured. Thank you for joining us today. Skyler's story is one that resonates with a depth of emotion that's hard to put into words. It's a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and a chilling reminder of how easily relationships can fracture when the complexities of human emotions go unchecked. Skyler's life, filled with promise and ambition, was taken away not by an external force, but by those who were supposed to protect her, the very friends she had trusted. This devastating reality reminds us all of the importance of understanding the dynamics of our relationships, especially the fragile bonds we share with those closest to us. Let this story serve as a warning, not just about the dangers of keeping secrets or harboring unresolved issues, but also about the need for open communication and emotional honesty. Skyler's tragic death is a reminder that we must never take for granted the people in our lives. We must cherish those we care about, communicate openly, and never allow anything, no matter how small, to go unaddressed. If Skyler's story teaches us anything, it's that silence and secrecy can be deadly, and that the ones we trust most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us the deepest. We hope you've learned something from Skyler's story today, a lesson in the importance of empathy, trust, and the consequences of ignoring the signs in our relationships. Stay tuned for more true crime stories, where we delve into the complexities of human nature and the mysteries that shape our world. And as always, take care, stay aware, and remember that the truth, no matter how dark, always finds its way to the surface.